What is good, everybody? Welcome back to another episode brought to you by the League FFB. Today, we are going to be talking about my top 30 quarterbacks for redraft fantasy football. We did a video like this on the channel a month or two ago. This is the updated version of my current quarterback rankings. If you guys have those drafts coming up, this is exactly what you're going to want. We're going to be updating the running backs, wide receivers, and tight ends over the next couple of days as well. So make sure you stay tuned for that. Make sure you're subscribed to the channel for that. That way you don't miss them. But without wasting any more time, let's hop right into today's video. Let's start talking about these quarterback rankings. Now, first and foremost, I want to get it out of the way. What is the type of settings that we are going to be basing these rankings off of? Now, this is going to be your standard quarterback settings. It is a 4-point passing touchdown. It is your standard rushing yards, your standard passing yards, your standard interceptions. If you have a league that is a 6-point passing touchdown, bonuses for the long plays, anything like that, points per completion, this is not going to be applicable for that. This is more so that standard vanilla type of quarterback settings in those one quarterback leagues, maybe those super flex leagues as well, but that 4-point passing touchdown type of league. But as you can see, I got the tier maker pulled up on the screen. I have it about 8 tiers to get through all 30 of these guys. We are going to be starting it off in tier 1, and in tier 1, I have 2 quarterbacks. The first one is going to be Josh Allen. Now, Josh Allen, last year, 24.2 fantasy points per game. Obviously, the departure of Stephon Diggs, the departure of Gabe Davis in this offense as well. I don't really care. The reality is Josh Allen, he is going to rush the football. He's still going to throw for a lot of yards. You got Keon Coleman, Khalil Shakir, Curtis Samuel, Dalton Kincaid. Still lots of things to be excited about in this offense. Yes, Stephon Diggs is going to be a big piece that is probably going to be missing from this offense, but most likely it's not going to be a significant dip. They still are projected like 9.5 wins in this division. So I think Josh Allen, he's still going to be very good for fantasy football, and he's going to give you the rushing upside that you want out of the quarterback one in fantasy football. Now, the second guy that I think should stay here is Jalen Hurts. Now, Jalen Hurts, he is a guy who has the rushing upside. People are going to be expecting the tush-push numbers to come down with Jason Kelce now gone and Saquon Barkley there. I don't think that that's a bad thing for the most part. He still has the rushing upside on the ground in between the 20s, and Kellen Moore, the new offensive coordinator here, is going to make this offense a little bit more pass heavy. I think it's going to be a little bit better than it was down the stretch last season. I think Jalen Hurts was banged up down the stretch last season. That also kind of accounted for some of the dip that he had in his production down the stretch. I just think Jalen Hurts, he is going to be as good as it gets for fantasy football. He has everything we want, the passing upside, the good offense, the rushing upside. He's still a guy who I think should be considered the second best quarterback in fantasy football, and he is the only other player in this tier 1 for me. Now, as we move on to tier 2, I have 2 players in here as well. We have Lamar Jackson and Patrick Mahomes. Now, we can talk about both of these guys. Lamar, last year, coming off of the MVP, 21.1 fantasy points per game. Now, the only downside with Lamar Jackson is if you look over the last couple of years, there's an extensive list of injuries. It's always worrisome to think that Lamar Jackson could miss some time for your fantasy football teams. They didn't really improve on the offense at all. Obviously, Derrick Henry is there, which might mean more rushing opportunities for this offense. But as far as the passing game goes, year 2, Zay Flowers, Mark Andrews probably healthy, but other than that, there's not a lot to be excited about. I think Lamar Jackson, just the rushing upside alone, how efficient we think this offense is going to be, still going to keep him in that quarterback 3 range, that top 5 type of range, a guy that's going to be a very, very solid quarterback for your fantasy football teams. But there is a little bit of risk, I think, with a guy like Lamar Jackson. Now, looking at Patrick Mahomes, you got to say he doesn't have the rushing upside that these guys have. Now, he's still going to scramble. He's going to give you some rushing yards as well. We've seen him do it at the NFL level. And when you're talking about these 4 quarterbacks, obviously he is the best real-life quarterback, but for fantasy football, I think he's going to be the QB4 for me. When you look at this offense, yes, it has improved slightly. Hollywood Brown is there. He's going to miss a small part of the beginning of the season. You have Rashee Rice, who is likely not going to be suspended. People have been thinking he's going to be suspended. The season is just weeks away. He's likely not going to be suspended this time. Travis Kelce, we haven't seen the fall off. Isaiah Pacheco still there. This is going to be a good offense. Patrick Mahomes has the ability to probably pass for the most touchdowns of any of these players that we're talking about, but he has the least amount of rushing upside. Still, we're not going to knock him too far down our rankings. He's still the quarterback 4 for me. Now let's move on to my tier 3 here. I have 4 quarterbacks in this tier. We have Kyler Murray as my quarterback 5, CJ Stroud quarterback 6, Anthony Richardson quarterback 7, and Joe Burrow quarterback 8. I kind of want to talk about a few of these guys. We'll talk about them a little bit more briefly than the guys up top. Kyler Murray, I think this is a player who, when he is on the field, he is dominant for fantasy football. Last year, 18.9 fantasy points per game. That was recovering from the ACL and having no offense really around him. I mean, the best player on his team was maybe James Conner, Trey McBride, who he was force feeding a bunch of targets to, but now he has Marvin Harrison Jr. He's a year healthier from that ACL tear. And like I said, 18.9 fantasy points per game, which was more than any quarterback in this entire tier. Yes, more than CJ Stroud, more than A-Rich, more than Joe Burrow. Give him this new look offense and a healthier season. He has the rushing upside you want. He's going to have the passing upside that we want as well. I'm very high on him. I think he's a top 5 quarterback, man. I really do. I think he's one of the best value picks you can make at the quarterback position, and definitely a guy that I'm willing to put all of my chips in on the table for here in 2024. Now, CJ Stroud, obviously he doesn't have a ton of rushing upside, but he has the ability to pass for 40-plus touchdowns, especially with this offense here with Stephon Diggs, Nico Collins, Tank Dell, Dalton Schultz, all of these guys, even Joe Mixon in the backfield now that they could pass some dump-offs to and do things like that. I think CJ Stroud, if you want to swap him and A-Rich in these rankings, I don't mind it. I think they're going to be similar just because A-Rich has a ton of rushing upside. That's probably going to keep him afloat, but these guys should be in consideration for the top 5, top 6 picks in your fantasy football drafts. Now, Joe Burrow, he is also a guy that obviously I'm wearing the jersey today. I think he is going to be a little bit undervalued in drafts. I'm probably undervaluing him a little bit, but I just couldn't get him any higher. I think this offense is likely going to pass a little bit more with Joe Mixon no longer on this team, but I do worry a little bit about the efficiencies of this offense. He hasn't necessarily been healthy either. He, obviously being Joe Burrow, he hasn't been the healthiest over the last couple of years. I'm still a little bit worried about that wrist injury. It sounds like he says there's nothing to be worried about, but a lot of the medical doctors and a lot of the fantasy doctors that I've been watching and I've been kind of reading on, they say that Joe Burrow should have a little bit of lingering effects. It's going to be interesting to see what happens, but you can't take him out of tier 3. This is a guy who still has the ability to throw for 40-plus touchdowns, and that's why you're going to keep him here in this tier 3 with these other guys. Now let's look at my tier 4. My tier 4 only has 2 quarterbacks. I have Dak Prescott of the Dallas Cowboys and Jordan Love of the Green Bay Packers. Now, Dak Prescott last year obviously had a very good season, more specifically the back half of the season. And you look at the fantasy points per game, he averaged 20.7 fantasy points per game last year. That was good for the QB3, I think, on the year, if I'm remembering off the top of my head. This is a guy who really nothing has changed. In fact, the only thing that has changed here in Dallas is Tony Pollard has left, meaning that there's likely even more passing opportunity for him because it will be a worse rushing offense with Rico Dowdle and Ezekiel Elliott in the backfield. You still haven't upgraded from Brandon Cooks. You have Jake Ferguson at the tight end. CeeDee Lamb obviously is the wide receiver 1. I think he could replicate what he did down the stretch last year. Maybe not the quarterback 3 overall, but I do think that this is a guy who can give us those QB1 numbers. I still have him right here as my quarterback 9. Now, Jordan Love, similar type of idea. He broke out through the back half of the stretch last year. You have the offense that is obviously very good there in Green Bay. Lots of wide receivers to throw to, tight ends to throw to, Josh Jacobs now in the backfield. I think he can take another step forward here this year. I have him as a top 10 quarterback. He averaged 19.4 fantasy points per game down the stretch too. I think he is going to be able to really establish himself as a fantasy football quarterback 1. As I mentioned, I have him in my top 10, and I think that this tier right here, tier 4, this is the last of the quarterbacks that I feel very comfortable with as my QB1. I think if I'm drafting any of these guys from Love all the way to Allen, you can only draft one quarterback on that team and feel comfortable with it because you don't need the backup. You can stream the backup because these guys are that good. Anybody now underneath Love going from tier 5 down, I think you might have to consider drafting 2 quarterbacks. So let's move on to tier 5 here. Tier 5 has 6 quarterbacks in this tier. So it's going to be Brock Purdy at 11, Jayden Daniels at 12, Goff at 13, Tua at 14, Caleb at 15, and Trevor Lawrence at 16. Now this tier to me is kind of the tier of unknown and or just that low-end QB1 spike weeks out of these other guys in good offenses, obviously. You have Brock Purdy, great offense. Now I will say at the time of this recording, I am recording this ahead of time, a few days ahead of time actually, and Brandon Ayuk is still a San Francisco 49er. If Brandon Ayuk is not a Niner by the time that this video comes out, Brock Purdy is going to have to move down these rankings, and to be honest, he's probably going to have to move down below, probably Tua Tagovailoa. That would be my initial gut reaction, would be to move him 3 or 4 spots down this tier. Now, he would remain in the same tier. He would not drop that much lower, but I do think that that needs to be said in case something happens between the time that I'm recording and the time that this is posted. Now, you also have guys in good offenses like Jared Goff, Tua Tagovailoa. These guys are going to be elevated by the offense and the offensive play calling around them. Obviously, the weapons, they speak for themselves for these guys as well. But then you also have the unknowns, the Jayden Daniels and the Caleb Williams. Jayden Daniels, I don't think he's the talent that Caleb Williams has, but he has absolutely incredible rushing upside. I think he could give you rookie year Lamar, maybe early career Jalen Hurts type of rushing upside. That's what Jayden Daniels can do. And because of that, he's probably going to have a high floor for fantasy football. Even if he's not that great on the NFL field in real life, I think the rushing upside will keep him afloat. Think about what Justin Fields did a few years ago for the Bears. And then Caleb Williams, he's going into a situation where he is likely one of the best rookie quarterback situations ever of all time. I mean, you have Keenan Allen there, Rome Odunze, a top 10 pick, and DJ Moore, Cole Kmet, DeAndre Swift, plus then you just have the talent of Caleb Williams. I think this is a guy who could break out in the second half of the year as he gets his feet a little bit wet at the NFL level. I wouldn't be surprised if he finishes as a top 12 guy. Now, you see, I have him in my rankings right now as my QB 15. This kind of feels like the floor to me. I didn't really know how much higher I could move him, but this felt very, very good for a Caleb Williams ranking. I think this is a guy that I'm going to be keeping my eye on, and if you are taking two quarterbacks, Caleb Williams is probably a guy that I would focus on because he does have the ability to pop and break out, maybe even kind of like rookie CJ Stroud did last year. And then Trevor Lawrence, he's going to be in this tier for me as well. I mean, I know a lot of the people don't like Trevor Lawrence right now. I think Trevor is still a fine quarterback. 17.3 fantasy points per game last year. That was just 0.5 points per game less than Jared Goff. A lot of people felt comfortable with Jared Goff last year. I think Trevor Lawrence with Brian Thomas Jr. in this offense, that is an upgrade. He is going to be the alpha number one wide receiver, help with some of the big plays, take the tops off of the defense. Trevor Lawrence is healthy this year as well. I like Trevor Lawrence as a bounce back candidate. Obviously, I'm not drafting him too highly. I have him as my quarterback 16, but I think a lot of people are forgetting about Trevor Lawrence or just wanting to fade Trevor Lawrence. I say do that with caution because I do think he can bounce back here in 2024. Now, moving on to tier 6, I have 3 quarterbacks in this tier. We are going to have Matthew Stafford of the Los Angeles Rams, Justin Herbert of the Los Angeles Chargers, and Kirk Cousins of the Atlanta Falcons. Now, all of these guys, you kind of got some older veterans and some question marks about them for the most part. You have guys like Matthew Stafford, who I actually do like a lot this year. You like the offense that he has, Kyren Williams, Sean McVay, Cooper Kupp, Puka Nacua. I think there's a lot to like here. Obviously, the age, some of that stuff is a little bit worrisome for Matthew Stafford. He has had some back issues. He's had a hamstring issue as of lately. But if you're looking for a value pick at the quarterback position, a veteran that can give you plenty of top 12 finishes on the week throughout the season, I think Matthew Stafford is one of the best bets to do that. Kind of same situation for Kirk Cousins. Good offense, obviously coming off of the Achilles injury. Last year, he averaged 19.3 fantasy points per game in his healthy games with the Minnesota Vikings. Now you put him here in this Atlanta offense. He's going to have Drake London, Kyle Pitts, a lot of good weapons as well. Bijan Robinson, obviously we know the weapons that they have there in Atlanta. He should be very solid this year. I think it's going to depend on how he bounces back from the Achilles injury, but it sounds like he's going to be ready for week 1. He should be the week 1 starter. And he should give us some good production at the quarterback position as well. And then Justin Herbert, we kind of need to talk about him because from a talent perspective, he probably belongs in the same conversation as Joe Burrow, Kyler Murray, CJ Stroud, Anthony Richardson. That's the talent that Justin Herbert has. The issue is the situation around Justin Herbert here in 2024. You have Jim Harbaugh coming over. He wants to establish the run here with Greg Roman in this offense. The weapons, Keenan Allen, Mike Williams, a lot of these guys that he was throwing the football to, even like Gerald Everett and things like that, Austin Eckler, all of these guys are gone. They are no longer there. It is kind of a wasteland for Justin Herbert this season. I think that is going to really cap his potential. It's going to cap the upside. His talent alone will be enough that you still can play him on certain matchups, but I think his ceiling is really capped this year. So probably a player that, even though he's more talented than guys like Stafford and Cousins, I think he's going to be in this tier with them based on his production that he gives you in 2024. And now I have 2 more tiers. I will say that if the quarterback is in tier 7 or tier 8, you're likely not wanting to draft them in those 1 quarterback leagues. They're more likely going to be super flex picks or more likely candidates that you can pick up off the waiver wire and stream depending on how many guys you have on the waiver wire throughout the week. But I do want to touch on them. We'll touch on them very briefly. But tier 7, we have guys like Deshaun Watson coming in as quarterback 20. We also have Aaron Rodgers, Justin Fields, Geno Smith, Baker Mayfield, Sam Darnold, and Will Levis. Now, this makes up my tier 7. I just don't see the rushing upside. I don't see the offensive upside with a lot of these guys. Now, there are a few exceptions. If you're looking to take shots or take stabs on certain players in tier 7 late in drafts, Justin Fields is a guy that obviously has the rushing upside. He is risky because even though it does seem like maybe he might get a shot at being the starting quarterback for this Steelers team, it's still a competition. It might be Russell Wilson. Now, that being said, Deshaun Watson, the best player in this tier. And then if you want to buy into a good offense, maybe a guy like Aaron Rodgers. We don't know how many passing touchdowns he's going to have this year, but they do have Bryce Hall, Garrett Wilson. They should be pretty good. Geno Smith, good offense as well. Sam Darnold, a good offense, but I don't know how much I'm drafting Sam Darnold, and that hurts to say as a Vikings fan. But overall, these are kind of the players that you are looking at. If you want my favorite players in this tier, Watson, Rodgers, Fields, Geno, obviously them being at the top of the tier, those are the guys that I like the most. Now let's move on to tier 8 here, and this is going to finish the top 30. It's actually going to be 33, but we'll go through all of them. You have Russell Wilson, Daniel Jones, Drake Maye, Bryce Young, Gardner Minshew, Bo Nix, and Derek Carr. Now, Russell Wilson, if he is the starter of the Steelers, just swap him and Justin Fields. That's the way that I would see it. You just want to swap them depending on who the starter is. Daniel Jones should have some rushing upside. Likely the offense isn't going to be that great. He does have Malik Neighbors, but I don't know if I believe in Daniel Jones that much. Drake Maye might not even start half of the first part of the year. Bryce Young, I just don't think that they have the upside there in Carolina. Minshew, Nix, Carr, not really looking to draft them at all unless they start out really hot, but I don't expect that to happen for anybody except maybe Bo Nix. So there you guys have it. This is my tiers of my top 30-ish, 33-ish quarterbacks, basically every starting quarterback in the NFL, and how I would draft them and how I would rank them amongst each other. Now, if you did like this video and you did enjoy the video, go ahead and hit that like button for me. Also, make sure you hit the subscribe button because we have the tight ends, running backs, and wide receivers coming out over the next couple of days, as I mentioned. And also make sure you're subscribed because we have a goal of 3,000 subscribers by week 1. We want to help you guys win your fantasy football championships this year and want to give you some good actionable content to do so. So make sure you're subscribed to the channel. Last but not least, make sure you guys go sign up for the Discord. It is free to join. It's linked in the description. There is no risk in doing it. As I mentioned, free to join. You literally just have a Discord account. You click the link. You can join the community with a bunch of fantasy football people. They want to talk fantasy with you. You can ask me direct questions throughout the season, start sit questions, trade questions, waiver questions, anything you got. Like I said, join the Discord. It is free to join. No risk in doing that. With all that out of the way, I have nothing else for you guys today. So I will see you on our next video. Until then, peace out.